The recent Pokemon Presents on Pokemon Day earlier this year revealed two new Paradox Pokemon, Walking Wake and Iron Leaves. Walking Wake has pretty much been declared the more popular Pokemon between these two, but it's also the far more interesting and intriguing Pokemon, and it all has to do with this Pokemon being the key to solving the mystery to a theory stemming back roughly 20 years in the Johto region with Pokemon Gold and Crystal. Hey Pokemon Champions, I'm Champion Blaze, and today I'll be explaining the secret meaning behind the reveal of Walking Wake and how it not only provides the key to solving an age-old Pokemon mystery from Johto, but also predicting brand new Paradox Pokemon as well that will hopefully be revealed at some point during the lifespan of Generation 9. So with that out of the way, let me explain exactly what it is I'm talking about when it comes to Walking Wake. Let's get started. So right before the DLC of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet known as the Teal Mask and the Indigo Disc were revealed, we were shown two brand new Paradox Pokemon known as Walking Wake and Iron Leaves. These two Pokemon are clearly inspired by the imaginary Paradox Pokemon we had seen prior to this in the Scarlet book and the Violet book respectively. Walking Wake is based off the apparent fusion of the legendary beast that we see in the Scarlet book, while Iron Leaves is inspired by the apparent fusion of the Swords of Justice that we see in the Violet book. Upon initial reveal and at first glance, me and many others in the community thought that the existence of this Pokemon completely retconned or contradicted the already established lore and mythos of the legendary beasts. To quickly recap, in Johto's distant past there was a storm that struck the Brass Tower and caused it to catch fire. This fire destroyed the Brass Tower and thus it became known as the Burned Tower. But during the fire, three unnamed and unknown Pokemon were trapped inside the tower and perished in the flames. Ho-Oh would then resurrect these three Pokemon into the legendary beasts of Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. For years it was speculated that the evolutions of Flareon, Vaporeon, and Jolteon were the Pokemon that perished in the tower, but these Pokemon were unknown and unnamed, so this wouldn't work. Other theories have arisen since then, but nothing has been confirmed. Until potentially now, that is. My answer to this age-old mystery is that Walking Wake, as well as the very possible past Paradox forms of Entei and Raikou, were the Pokemon that perished in the Brass Tower in the past. Now I'm sure you're probably wondering how this would make sense, and I promise I do have an explanation. Firstly, let's look at Paradox Pokemon themselves. Every single Paradox Pokemon in Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet is quite literally an unnamed Pokemon, as they are given names that simply describe their appearance and physiology rather than being given conventional Pokemon names. For instance, Great Tusks, Roaring Moon, or Slitherwing in Pokemon Scarlet, or Iron Hands, Iron Valiant, and Iron Moth in Pokemon Violet. So it would make total sense that the people of Johto, and specifically Ecruteak City, wouldn't know what these Pokemon are actually called if they've only been described in this way up until that point. But would Walking Wake have even existed during that time? Well, if Walking Wake was not extinct yet by the time of the legend, then I 100% believe Walking Wake and the potential Paradox forms to Entei and Raikou would have resided in Johto. Paradox Pokemon may be found in Paldea, but that's because the time machine created by Professors Sada and Turo are what allow them to exist in modern-day Paldea. Without their interference, all those Paradox Pokemon would most likely have lived in their native region. Slitherwing would have lived in ancient Unova or Roaring Moon in ancient Hoenn. Now, while all the Paradox Pokemon can be found in their modern-day forms in modern-day Paldea, I personally believe it would be far more likely that these Pokemon also naturally exist in their home regions as well. But we've also got to discuss the similarities between Walking Wake and modern-day Suicune. Walking Wake, first and foremost, is much larger than Suicune, which would make sense as historically creatures and animals in the past were naturally larger and more ferocious and savage. We can see this with prehistoric birds, prehistoric elephants, prehistoric cats like the saber-toothed tiger, etc. So Walking Wake as an ancient form of Suicune, it would make sense that it's substantially larger. Walking Wake also very fittingly walks on water just like Suicune is shown to be able to do in the anime. So with the draconic aesthetic and physiology that this Pokemon has, as well as its Velociraptor-inspired design, this Pokemon also has the Dragon typing, very fitting for this Pokemon. Of course, its design has its origins in the original Suicune design, but it also bears resemblance to the other legendary beasts, just mainly in its cloud mane around its neck and on its back. Of course, all three legendary beasts have this same style of mane as they reference rain clouds with Suicune, smoke with Entei, and thunder clouds with Raikou, but this mane also has a shape similar to all three Pokemon. Pokemon. On top of it, Game Freak is not going to design one member of a trio with a new form and not include the other two members. The only time this has happened in Pokemon's history was with the Hisuian starters of Hisuian Decidueye, Typhlosion, and Samurott. Any other time this has happened, all three members of the trio got the same treatment even if the new forms were added later. Examples of this include Megaforms to the Kanto starters, Megaforms for the Hoenn starters, Primal and Megaforms for the Weather trio, Therian forms for the Kami trio, Gigantamax forms for the Kanto starters, and Origin forms for the Creation trio. With the existence of Walking Wake, I have no doubt that at some point during Generation 9, we can expect to see the reveal of Paradox forms for Entei and Raikou. Maybe they could don names such as Howling Lava for Entei and something like Growling Thunder for Raikou. Or maybe they could take on names such as Roaring Volcano and Raging Thunder for Entei and Raikou respectively. And if Paradox forms for Entei and Raikou do come to fruition, then it would just further support that the three unnamed Pokemon that perished in the Burned Tower were in fact the Paradox forms of Entei, Raikou, and Suicune. Now I do need to address two elephants in the room, the first being, how would these Paradox forms perish in the fire in Ecruteak City? Paradox Pokemon all have base stat totals of 570, so they're pretty strong, great defenses, great offenses, and with their stats being so close to that of modern-day legendary Pokemon, it doesn't seem likely that they would perish so easily. However, to that I say that if we're being technical, Paradox Pokemon are not legendary Pokemon. However, in this instance, Walking Wake and Iron Leaves actually are, so it's possible that these Paradox Pokemon instead could have been in an already weakened state prior to the storm, or maybe the smoke from the fire entered their bodies which damaged their immune systems, causing them to cough, become poisoned, and not have the energy to escape the fire given their debilitated states. But the second aspect to discuss is the size of these potential Paradox Pokemon. We already know that Walking Wake is much larger than regular Suicune, so it would be safe to assume that the Paradox forms of Entei and Raikou would also be much larger than their modern-day counterparts. So now if we look back to episode 6 of Pokemon Generations, The Reawakening, we can see these silhouettes of the Pokemon that perished in the Burned Tower. However, since we've never known exactly which Pokemon these were, I'd say it's safe to assume that these were just generic silhouettes given to these three Pokemon for the sake of the episode. But when they get reborn, why would they have such different forms after being reborn? Well, my answer to this would be that I believe when Ho-Oh saw these three Pokemon die, it revived them in its own image. Much like Arceus can mold legendary Pokemon like Palkia and Dialga in its image and likeness, they would be revived with appearances that would make them less savage than their prehistoric counterparts and make them appear more as modern-day Pokemon. And with Ho-Oh having such a beautiful, powerful, and regal design, I think Ho-Oh would want to revive them in a similar fashion. So with all that being covered, I am very certain that Walking Wake is a hint towards the reveal of Paradox forms to Entei and Raikou, and together, this trio of Paradox Pokemon would become the three Pokemon that tragically died in the Burned Tower in Johto's history, and then would later be revived as the legendary beasts we know today. But what do you think about this theory? Do you think Walking Wake provides the answers to this Johto mystery? Leave all your thoughts down below. Until next time, make sure you train hard, and I'll catch you guys later.